What if your life's greatest achievement, your legacy, was treated as a nuisance by the person you love most? I met Lola in the heart of Mexico City, and I discovered something shocking. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from an enemy, but from a son who calls you naive. What happened to her will show you that age may bring wrinkles, but it never erases the strength of an unbreakable spirit. Imagine waking up one day believing you've secured your family's future, only to see your decades of effort devalued and sold as something worthless in a matter of seconds. That's exactly what Lola felt. Her story is a punch to the gut, but it's also a beacon. Today, I'm going to tell you how a mother's love was tested by the worst kind of ambition, and how a smart decision can be your greatest weapon when all seems lost. Every second counts because Lola's lesson is your protection. If you ignore this story, you risk seeing your own legacy being disdained. Stay with me until the end, and discover the document that turned the tables and saved Lola from her own children's contempt. You won't believe what she did when she realized they had underestimated her. I'm Dolores Ramos, but most people in La Roma know me simply as Lola. I'm 82 years old, and I've lived on the same street in Mexico City since before the traffic got unbearable, and before Starbucks appeared where my friend's flower shop used to be. My hands are smaller now, frailer than they were when I first began washing clothes in a tin basin out back, but they still remember every motion. Scrub, rinse, wring, like muscle memory, tied to my very being. For over 5 decades, I poured my heart into Lavanderia La Fortuna. It started with one rusted machine and a line of wet sheets drying on a clothesline strung between 2 poles. Now it's a full operation, one I built with cracked hands and stubborn dignity. 5 years ago, I decided it was time to slow down. Not stop, just slow. Mateo, my only son, had always been close. At least I believed he was. He and Isabella, his wife, moved into the upstairs apartment I kept above the laundromat, a spacious place with large windows that catch the morning light, the kind that makes you want to drink coffee and think about your life. I let them take over the business. No contracts, no fuss, just trust. I thought I was passing on more than a building. I was passing on a legacy. In the mornings, I'd sit on my porch in my small casita just 3 doors down from the shop, sipping cinnamon tea and listening to the city wake up, the rumble of buses, the song of the street vendors shouting about tamales or fresh mango. My garden was my new rhythm, bougainvilleas, marigolds, and a stubborn rosemary bush that refused to die. People still waved at me like I was queen of the block. Sometimes I'd go visit the laundromat, not to interfere, just to watch. The girls still called me Doña Lola. That meant something. So when Mateo and Isabella called and said they needed to talk urgently, I thought maybe someone was sick. Or maybe they wanted to take a vacation and needed me to manage the shop again. I baked a banana bread. Mateo always loved it when he was a boy. Warm with cinnamon, the edges a little crispy. I set it on the table and waited for them like a mother does, expecting nothing but the usual concerns. Nothing prepares you for betrayal, especially not when it comes from the 2 people you thought you could trust more than anyone. They arrived together, dressed a bit too nicely for a casual visit. Mateo had that anxious glint in his eye, the one he used to get when he broke something as a kid and was about to confess. Isabella sat with her back too straight, her phone face down on the table like a prop. They said they had good news. Opportunity, Isabella called it. A future for all of us. Mateo avoided my eyes as he said the laundromat had been sold. Not will be sold, no. Had been sold. To a corporation I'd never heard of. Foreign one. They said it like it was something I should be happy about. I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. I even reached for the bread, thinking maybe it was some cruel modern prank, the kind kids pull for social media. But then I saw their faces. Serious. Cold, even. When I asked who signed the papers, they said they had. When I reminded them whose name was on the deed, Mateo's voice got sharp, defensive. Mama, don't start. You're too old to understand how business works now. Isabella chimed in too, sweetly venomous. We did this for all of us, Doña Lola. The laundromat is outdated. You should be enjoying the rest of your life, not worrying about machines and bleach. They talked as if I were already gone, like I was a burden they'd finally maneuvered around. Mateo leaned forward and said they'd make sure I was taken care of, as if I were a pet, fed, walked, and left alone. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth was dry and my chest tight. Not from age, from heartbreak. They left not long after, assuming the conversation was over. Mateo kissed my head as if nothing had shattered. Isabella took a slice of banana bread with her. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the framed photo on the wall. Me and my husband, Armando, on our wedding day, young and determined, standing in front of the first version of Lavanderia La Fortuna. That photo had seen 1,000 sunrises. It had never looked more accusing than it did in that moment. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun had moved across the floor in slow streaks, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. At some point, I stood up without thinking and walked to the old cedar chest by the window. It creaked as I opened it. Inside were memories, yes, but also something sharper: leverage. Under layers of family photos, a wool shawl, and Armando's favorite cigar box, I found the folder. Yellowed, yes, but intact. Original property deeds, my signature, my husband's. No amendments. No transfers. They had forgotten one thing, or maybe never knew. The business might have been in their hands, but the land, the walls, and the very foundation of Lavanderia La Fortuna still belonged to me. Legally. Fully. I sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the documents as if they were old friends I had neglected, but who had returned just in time. It didn't make me feel triumphant. Not yet. It made me feel sad. Sad that Mateo hadn't asked, that Isabella hadn't thought twice about bypassing me. My thoughts went everywhere. To Armando, who would have known exactly what to do. To the neighbors who'd see a for sale sign and think I'd approved. To the women who worked with me for years, who might lose their jobs without warning. This wasn't just a matter of money. It was dignity. It was the erosion of everything I'd built, not by strangers, but by my own blood. I remembered Mateo's first day at the laundromat when he was 10, how he proudly folded towels with crooked corners. I remembered when he called me Yefa. Now he called me irrelevant. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't water the plants. I didn't sip my tea. I put on my brown shawl, the one with deep pockets, and walked down to the notary's office. I hadn't been there in years, but the receptionist still recognized me. "Doña Lola," she said, like I was someone important. That little kindness almost broke me. I asked to see the attorney who had helped me and Armando with the property back in the 70s. He had passed, they said, but his daughter had taken over. Good. Maybe she had the same sharp eyes. She greeted me with a firm handshake and didn't waste time. I laid the papers out on her desk like a blackjack dealer showing a winning hand. Her brow furrowed as she scanned them, page by page. "These are ironclad," she finally said. "No transfer of ownership. No sale without your signature." I asked her what would happen if someone had already signed a deal. She looked up. Then, "They've committed fraud." The word felt too strong, like a slap, but part of me needed to hear it. I left the office with new copies, freshly notarized. I placed them in a manila envelope, sealed it tight, and tucked it under my arm. Outside, the city roared as usual. Car horns, barking dogs, and street vendors shouting about fresh tortillas. But inside me, something had gone quiet, like a door closing, like the part of me that had always made excuses for Mateo finally locking itself shut. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked back to my house, sat on my porch, and waited. Later that afternoon, I saw them. Mateo and Isabella were heading to the laundromat. I could tell by the way they walked, brisk, careless, that they thought everything was fine, that their plan was progressing. I watched them unlock the front gate. I saw them laughing about something. That's when it hit me. They didn't feel guilty. They weren't conflicted. They were confident, entitled, as if betrayal was just another Tuesday errand. I clutched the envelope tighter. I didn't go to them. Not yet. There's something powerful about knowing and letting others live in their ignorance for just a bit longer. I needed time to think. Not about revenge. That's not my way. But about boundaries. About consequences. About what respect looks like when it's been discarded like a stained bedsheet. That night, I made myself dinner. Beans, rice, and no-pails. And ate alone in silence. My heart didn't feel old. It felt awake. Sharper than it had in years. The next morning, I was up before sunrise. There was a chill in the air, the kind that seeps into your joints and reminds you you're not young anymore. Not physically, at least. But my mind? My mind was sharper than ever. I took a notebook from my kitchen drawer and started writing down everything I remembered from the meeting with Mateo and Isabella. Dates, phrases, expressions. The way Isabella said, "You should be enjoying the rest of your life," as if I were already halfway buried. I wrote it all down, not because I planned to sue, at least not yet, but because I needed the truth on paper. By mid-morning, I walked down to the laundromat. I hadn't done that since I handed it over to them. The bell above the door chimed like it always had. The smell hit me first. Warm detergent, steam, and a hint of lavender from the fabric softener. Familiar, almost comforting. But then I saw it. A new poster on the wall. A large corporate logo with "Coming Soon, Washmax Mexico" written in slick blue letters. Right under it, a QR code and a smiling couple holding towels. I didn't recognize them. They weren't my people. One of the girls I'd hired years ago, Carla, looked up and froze when she saw me. "Doña Lola," she whispered, like she wasn't sure I was real. I smiled and waved her over. She walked slowly, almost guiltily. I asked her if she knew what was happening. She nodded. "Mateo said you approved it," she muttered, not meeting my eyes. My stomach dropped. So they'd already started spreading lies. I patted Carla's arm gently and thanked her. None of this was her fault. I walked through the place like a ghost. The washers humming, the dryers rattling, customers chatting over folding tables. Everything looked the same on the outside, but something inside had shifted. I noticed Isabella behind the counter, talking to a man in a suit. She didn't see me. I didn't want her to. Not yet. I slipped out quietly, heart pounding, anger simmering below the surface like a pot about to boil. I realized I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased. Back home, I sat at my table and laid out the documents again. One by one. Ownership, licensing, zoning, all of it in my name. I'd been smart. Years ago. Armando insisted we never change it. "If anything ever happens," he used to say, "this protects us." At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Now, I knew better. I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. A new one. Independent. Young, but with a voice that sounded like she'd eaten worse things than betrayal for breakfast. Her name was Jimena. She listened carefully, never interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Doña Lola, if you have the documents and their signatures are not on the deed, they can't sell anything." I asked her what my next step should be. She paused and said, "You have 3 options. Confront them privately, send a cease and desist, or go public." The word public made me flinch. La Roma is a loud neighborhood. News travels faster than fire. But I was no longer afraid of noise. I'd been quiet for too long. That evening, I called Mateo. I didn't invite him over. I didn't bake anything. Just a simple call. "Can you come by tomorrow morning?" "Alone," I said. He hesitated. I could hear Isabella whispering something in the background. "Is something wrong?" he asked. I replied, "Yes, but it's nothing you can't fix. If you show up," he agreed. I hung up before he could ask anything else. I sat in silence afterward, the phone still in my hand, staring at the wall where that wedding photo hung like a witness. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mateo as a boy again, chasing pigeons in the plaza, holding my hand at the market, falling asleep in the back of the laundromat on piles of warm towels. I kept wondering when he stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a piece on a chessboard. Was it my fault? Did I hand him too much? Too soon? Did I mistake convenience for closeness? At some point, grief turned into resolve. I wasn't going to let them take what I built, not without a fight. I was already dressed when Mateo knocked on the door. He didn't bring coffee or pan dulce like he usually did. He looked tired, not in the eyes, but in the posture. He sat on the same chair he always used, the one with the loose leg I never got around to fixing. I didn't offer him anything. No food, no small talk. I simply handed him the envelope. "Open it," I said. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From arrogance, pretending to be calm. He flipped through the documents. His brows furrowed. He cleared his throat. This is old paperwork," he said. "We've updated things since then." I looked at him, really looked, and for a second, I saw the boy he used to be, trying to explain why the neighbor's window was broken. "No, Mateo. You updated things in your head. The law didn't." He shifted in his seat, flipping back to the first page. "But I thought," I cut him off. "That's the problem. You thought. You didn't ask." There was a long silence. I could hear a dog barking in the distance, a truck reversing down the block. He finally said, "Look, Mama, maybe we made a mistake, okay? But it's done. The deal is signed." I leaned forward. "No, you signed. But it means nothing without me. The land, the building, the license, all of it is mine. He looked at me like I had just grown horns. Why didn't you tell us? I tilted my head. Why didn't you ask? His pride flared. We were trying to help. Isabella thought. I interrupted again, softer this time. You stopped thinking like a son and started thinking like a shareholder. He stood up abruptly. So what now? You're going to ruin everything? Make us look like fools? My heart hurt, but my voice didn't tremble. No, Mateo, you already did that yourselves. I reached into my pocket and placed a copy of a cease and desist letter on the table. This is what happens when you lie to someone who gave you everything. He stared at the paper like it might explode. His shoulders sagged. What do you want from me? He asked, finally sounding small. I answered plainly, respect, honesty, and for you to remember that this wasn't just a building to me. It was my life. He sat back down, eyes suddenly wet. I didn't think you'd fight us. I smiled, not with joy, but with truth. That's because you mistook silence for weakness. You forgot who raised you. The air between us thickened, the kind of air that holds years of unspoken truths. He didn't say sorry. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he took the envelope again, slower this time, and read every word. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He walked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath them was not theirs to stand on. I didn't watch him go. I just sat there, letting the quiet settle. That afternoon, Jimena called. She'd received word that the sale had been paused. The buyers were confused. The paperwork was in dispute. You've bought time, she said. I thanked her, and before she hung up, she added, you should prepare, though. They might push back. I told her I'd been pushed before. By life, by men, by fate, but never by my own son. And never without pushing back harder. I walked out to my garden with a pair of old scissors and began trimming the bougainvillea. The sun was warm on my back, and the thorns pricked my hands, but I didn't mind. It felt good. To bleed for something real. Something mine. I wasn't done. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight shift. Like a woman reclaiming not just her property, but her place in the story. The days that followed felt strange. Like I was walking through the same neighborhood, but everything had shifted slightly to the left. Neighbors greeted me like always, but I could feel something behind their eyes. Curiosity, maybe. Rumors were moving. That's how things go in La Roma. It's not the newspaper that spreads news. It's the ladies at the tortilleria and the barber on the corner. People knew something was happening at La Fortuna. They just didn't know what. Carla stopped by one morning, clutching a small bag of pan dulce. She sat with me on the porch and asked, Doña Lola, is it true they tried to sell the place? I nodded. Her eyes watered. That laundromat gave me everything. I raised my kids because of that job. I squeezed her hand. They forgot what it meant. To others. But I haven't. She offered to testify if needed. I told her I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I appreciated her loyalty more than she knew. A few days later, Isabella showed up, alone, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. I didn't invite her in. She stood on my porch like it was her first time there. I came to talk, she said. Her voice was tight, too rehearsed. I stayed silent. Mateo's been a mess, she continued. He feels terrible. I raised an eyebrow. Does he feel terrible because of what he did? Or because it didn't work? That hit her. She flinched slightly, then looked away. She sat on the bench by the rosemary bush, crossed her legs, and sighed. Look, I get it. You feel betrayed. But we were just trying to build something bigger. For our family. For our kids. I leaned against the doorframe. You tried to build on land that wasn't yours. You didn't just take a shortcut. You tried to erase me from my own story. She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Just silence. And that told me everything. After a few minutes, she stood up. So what now? Are you going to fight us forever? I looked at her without blinking. No, just long enough to remind you I'm not invisible. She nodded slowly, then walked away. No apology, no tears. Just a woman who thought she'd won, realizing she never understood the game to begin with. I watched her disappear down the street, then turned and went back inside. The house felt warmer than it had. In weeks. That evening, I made tamales. The kind Armando used to say tasted like home. I wrapped each one carefully, humming an old ranchera while the masa steamed. It felt good to make something with my hands again. Not out of duty, out of peace. Mateo didn't call that night. Neither did Isabella. But I didn't expect them to. I wasn't waiting anymore. That part of me had already burned away. Jimena called the next morning. They've withdrawn the sale, she said. Officially, the buyers backed out. I closed my eyes and let that sentence settle deep in my chest. They said the family dynamic was too messy, she added, almost laughing. I smiled. Good, I thought. Let them see what happens when you try to sell something that was never for sale. Let them walk away confused. I was done explaining myself. For the first time in weeks, I went inside the laundromat. Alone. I walked between the rows of machines and touched each one like an old friend. The girls greeted me with soft eyes and warm voices. No one asked questions. Carla handed me an apron. Just for today? She asked. I smiled. Just for today. And for a few quiet hours I worked, folding, sorting, remembering. Not because I had to, but because it still mattered. The next few days settled into a new rhythm. I didn't return to the laundromat again. Not to work, at least. That one visit was enough. Enough to remind myself that what I built was still standing, still alive. I walked past it each morning, nodded to the Aibar. Girls checked the plants in the window boxes and kept walking. I had no need to supervise or reclaim control. I had already done what I needed to do. Draw a line that could no longer be crossed. Mateo eventually called. Twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. His voice sounded small. Tired. Mama, can we talk? He said in the second message. Please. I just want to understand where we go from here. I sat on my porch with the phone in my hand, listening to his words with a heart that had been cracked, but not broken. I didn't delete the messages, but I didn't call back either. Some silences have to be earned. Isabella stopped showing her face on the street. I'm not sure if it was guilt or shame or simply embarrassment. La Roma has a way of remembering things for a long time. I heard through a neighbor that they'd canceled their plans to move into a newer condo complex. Apparently, the buyers who backed out were connected to that deal too. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. Actions have consequences, that's all. One afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, from Mateo. That surprised me. He never writes anything by hand. His handwriting was still the same, blocky, rushed, full of hesitation. In the letter, he didn't apologize. Not directly. But he did say, I never saw how much of you was in that building until it almost slipped through my hands. That sentence, more than any apology, struck me. It meant he finally really looked, at what I had built. He wrote about memories, about falling asleep on warm sheets, about the clatter of coins in the register, about how I used to hum when the machines got too loud. He said he wanted to start over, not with ownership, not with power, but with understanding. He asked if we could talk again. No business, he wrote. Just mother and son. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the cedar chest, next to the deed. The next day I invited him for breakfast. I didn't tell him why. I just said, bring coffee, real coffee, no instant. He showed up early, holding a paper bag with conchas and 2 steaming cups from the cafe near the plaza. He looked thinner, more tired, but more present. We ate in silence for a while, just listening to the city wake up. After a few minutes, he finally said, I was stupid. I nodded. Yes, I replied. But now you know better. We didn't talk about the laundromat. Not that morning. We talked about Armando, about how he used to fix machines with coat hangers and duct tape. We talked about the time a stray cat gave birth in one of the dryers and how we ended up keeping 2 of the kittens. We laughed. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I had my son back. Not the man who tried to sell me out, but the boy who used to sweep lint off the floor and say, "This is ours, right, Mama?" When he left, he hugged me tight. Longer than usual. "I'll never try to take it from you again," he said. "I promise." I looked at him and replied, "Don't make promises. Just show up. That's enough." He nodded. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not erased, not fixed, but acknowledged. And that's where healing always begins. The next weekend, I walked down to the small market near Avenida Alvaro Obregón, the one where the same fruit vendor has been yelling "Mangos dulces como tu ex" for the last 20 years. He saw me and waved, handing me the juiciest one in the bunch. "For the Queen of Roma," he joked. I smiled, not because of the words, but because I realized something. I was still here, still known, still seen, even when my own family had tried to reduce me to background noise. A few neighbors stopped me as I passed. Some asked about the laundromat, others just offered hugs. One woman said, "Doña Lola, I heard what happened. You did good. You stood your ground. I thanked her, but I didn't say much. Not because I was hiding, but because when you survive a storm, you don't always need to tell people how strong the wind was. You just dry yourself off and keep walking. That afternoon, I found myself back at the cedar chest again. I opened it slowly, touched each paper, each memory, each fragile piece of my life stored away like backup oxygen. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I took out a fresh envelope and wrote a letter. Not to Mateo, not to Isabella, but to my future self. I wrote what had happened, every feeling, every silence, every word I never got to say. I sealed it, dated it, and placed it underneath the deed. Why? Because someday, when my body is gone and my name is just another whisper in the city, I want someone to find that letter. Maybe it'll be one of my great-grandchildren, maybe a stranger, but I want them to know that this old woman didn't just own a laundromat. She owned her story. She fought to be respected. She loved. She lost. And she never let betrayal rewrite her legacy. I didn't just survive. I chose to live with my eyes open. Mateo began visiting more after that. Not every day, but enough. Sometimes he brought the kids, sometimes just himself. Isabella didn't come. At first, I didn't ask about her. He never forced the subject. But one Sunday, she showed up, holding a lemon pie, the kind I used to bake on her birthdays. I tried your recipe, she said awkwardly. It's not as good. I looked at the crust, a bit burnt. No, I said, but it's a start. We ate it together, the three of us. The kids ran around in the garden, chasing butterflies, arguing over who got to water the cactus. No one talked about the sale. No one brought up the papers. And that silence, that shared, unspoken agreement, felt like an olive branch. Not a full apology, maybe, but something resembling recognition. That was enough for now. Not forgiveness, but a quiet beginning. I started spending more time in the front garden again. People passed by, waved, sometimes stopped to talk. Some asked if I would ever sell the laundromat. I'd laugh and say, only when the sun forgets to rise. I wasn't holding on out of spite. I was holding on because that place, its walls, its scent, its heartbeat, still had something to teach my family. Maybe even me. Letting go, I was learning, doesn't always mean walking away. One evening, as the sky turned that deep coral pink only Mexico City can pull off, I sat on the porch and watched the lights flicker on at La Fortuna. The neon sign buzzed softly. The hum of dryers reached me like a lullaby. I closed my eyes and listened. I could almost hear Armando's voice again, somewhere in the back, teasing me about overloading the whites. My eyes watered, but I didn't wipe them. Some tears are not for sadness. They're just memory, overflowing. One morning, I received a letter from the city. It was a reminder about a routine inspection for the business license. I almost tossed it aside. Old habit, since I hadn't handled those things in years. But then I paused. I opened it, read the details, and felt a tug in my chest. This is still mine. The responsibility, the weight, the honor of it. I decided to show up for the inspection myself. Not because I didn't trust the girls, but because I needed to be seen again. By the city, by the system, by myself. When I arrived, the inspector looked startled. Doña Lola? He asked, flipping through his papers. You still handle this personally? I smiled. I do today. We walked through the building together. I answered every question. Showed him the fire extinguisher tags, the employee log, the permits. The inspector looked impressed. This place is running better than most in the area, he said. I didn't need the compliment, but it warmed something deep inside me. Legacy, I thought, not just survival. After the inspection, I stayed for a while. Sat on the bench in the back, near the drying racks. Carla brought me a cup of café de olla without asking. The smell took me back decades. It was there, in that quiet corner, that Isabella found me. She had come by to pick up a box of linens for the apartment. When she saw me, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she sat beside me. You know, she said, I didn't grow up with women like you. I didn't answer. I let her keep going. My mother never worked. My grandmother barely spoke. When I married Mateo, I thought the laundromat was old, like a relic. Her voice broke a little. But I see it now. It's not old. It's alive. Because of you. I looked at her then. Really looked. Her makeup was minimal. Her nails unpolished. Something in her had shifted too. Not dramatically, but honestly. Thank you, I said, for saying that. It was the first moment between us that didn't feel like a performance. From that day on, things changed in small ways. Isabella began visiting without Mateo, sometimes just to bring flowers for the shop, other times to drop off empanadas or leftover pozole. She even helped Carla with inventory once, fumbling through it but laughing at herself. The girls didn't know what to make of it at first. Neither did I. But we let her in, slowly, carefully, like a wound learning how to scar over without reopening. I still didn't forget. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's just choosing not to carry the weight with clenched fists. Mateo continued to show up too. He started helping with the bookkeeping again, this time with full transparency. Every receipt, every signature, every decision, he showed me first. No surprises, he said. I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. We were learning each other again, like two neighbors who had once been family, finding their way back. The business kept thriving. Lavanderia La Fortuna became a quiet landmark in the neighborhood. Young couples came in asking if it was true the original owner still lived nearby. Some even asked to take photos in front of the vintage sign. I didn't pose, but I watched from across the street with a quiet pride. Let them take pictures, I thought. Let them capture a little piece of what it meant to last, to remain standing when others crumbled. And in that persistence, I found peace. Not because everything had returned to the way it was. It hadn't. It never could. But because I had defended something worth protecting. Not just a building or a brand, but a lifetime, a truth, a name, mine. And even as time moved forward, I remained anchored, not in bitterness, but in memory, in choice, in love that didn't yield to silence or betrayal. Not long after, a young woman knocked on my door. She was no one I recognized, maybe mid-20s, with curly hair and nervous hands. "Are you Doña Lola?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. I nodded. "My abuela worked for you a long time ago. Josefina Ramos." The name hit me like a soft breeze from the past. Josefina had folded more linens than I could count, and once saved the entire building from a gas leak by noticing the faint smell before anyone else. "I just wanted to say thank you," the girl continued. "Because of that job, my grandmother was able to raise my mom, and my mom was able to send me to school." She handed me a small box. Inside was a handmade soap with pressed lavender. "I run a small tienda now, natural products. My mom said I should bring you one." I felt the back of my throat tighten. I thanked her and held the box to my chest long after she had left. That night, I didn't sleep much. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the window frames, the little cracks in the tile. Armando never got around to fixing. This house wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it held everything I had survived. And I began to realize the fight for the laundromat wasn't just about legacy. It was about presence, about saying, I am still here. I still matter. My life still echoes. One morning, I went to the bank to update my will. The manager offered me coffee while we waited for the notary. I told him I wanted the laundromat to pass on only under very specific conditions. He raised his eyebrows. Like what? I smiled. Like compassion and respect. If they're not met, the building goes to the women who've worked with me for over a decade. He nodded solemnly. That's the most honest clause I've seen all year. I didn't tell Mateo or Isabella right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because some decisions are sacred. Not every truth has to be delivered with a speech. I wanted them to earn that knowledge, to understand the weight of what had almost been lost. I left a copy of the updated will in the cedar chest. I didn't hide it. I just left it where they'd only find it if they were looking for something real. In the following weeks, I noticed something subtle in Mateo. He asked more questions, listened more. He didn't just show up, he stayed. Sometimes we'd sit in silence for an hour, peeling guavas or playing with the kids in the patio. I could see it. He was rebuilding the bridge, brick by brick. Not with grand gestures, but with presence. And presence, I had learned, was louder than any apology. One Sunday, Isabella brought her mother to visit. That surprised me. She was a quiet woman with careful eyes. We sat together under the shade and drank tamarind juice. At one point, her mother looked at me and said, "She's trying, you know?" I nodded. "I can see it." She smiled, then added, "But it takes a strong woman to make her try." That moment stayed with me. Strength, I realized, wasn't in shouting. It was in standing still when the storm pushes. Hardest. That night, I lit a candle for Armando. I don't do that often. I'm not a religious woman, not in the formal sense, but I believe in light. In memory. I placed the candle by our wedding photo and whispered, I kept it safe, just like we said I would. The flame danced gently, casting flickers of gold across the old wood. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt answered. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at the neighborhood association meeting. They asked me to share a few words about the history of La Colonia Roma. But what they really wanted, I think, was a story. So I gave them one. I spoke about a woman who built a laundromat from one machine, who raised a son and trusted too easily, who almost lost everything not to a stranger, but to silence, and how that silence, once broken, became her greatest power. People clapped. Some even stood. But it wasn't the applause that moved me. It was the look in their eyes. Recognition. Not of fame, but of value. Of someone who had been there all along, quietly holding together threads no one else saw. That evening, a young journalist asked to interview me. She said, I think people need to hear from women like you. I smiled and replied, they've always needed to. They just haven't listened until now. The article came out a week later. It was titled, The Washerwoman Who Kept a Neighborhood Clean and a Family Honest. It was poetic, maybe even a bit dramatic, but the message rang true. Strangers started leaving notes at the laundromat. Some slipped flowers into the mailbox. A school teacher brought her class to visit and told them, this is what legacy looks like. I didn't know what to say to that. I just stood by the door and welcomed them in. I wasn't used to being seen like that. Not as a symbol, not as a story, but little by little I allowed it. Not for ego, but for purpose. If my life, my pain, my strength, my quiet resistance could help someone else choose courage over convenience, then maybe it was worth stepping out of the background. Not to take the spotlight, but to light it for someone else. One Saturday, as I watered the garden, Mateo came over carrying a toolbox. The shelf in the back of the laundromat is loose, he said. Thought we could fix it together. We worked side by side for hours, sweating, swearing, laughing, just like old times. When we finished, I looked around the room and whispered, it smells the same. He smiled, because you never let it forget you. The girls who worked there began calling me La Jefa again. It started as a joke, but it stuck. I didn't correct them. Not because I wanted authority, but because I had reclaimed something more valuable, presence. I was no longer a shadow in my own story. I was the outline, the ink, the signature at the bottom of the page. On the 1-year anniversary of the failed sale, I hosted a small lunch for everyone at the shop. Nothing fancy, tamales, agua fresca, and arroz con leche. Carla made a banner that read, Gracias, Doña Lola. I almost cried when I saw it, but instead I raised my glass and simply said, I didn't do this alone. I just made sure no one erased us. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, food, and the hum of dryers spinning behind us, I knew something sacred had been restored. That night, as I sat alone on the porch, the city buzzed like always. Taxis honked, music drifted from windows. The same stray cat leapt over my fence and settled by my feet. I looked at the stars, not to wish for anything, but to thank them, for the strength, for the clarity, for reminding me that even in old age, a woman can still stand her ground and hold the line, especially when that line is her name. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to a citywide event honoring local women entrepreneurs. I almost didn't go. I don't like the fuss, the photos, the long speeches that always feel a little too sweet. But Carla insisted. You have to go, Doña Lola. That laundromat changed lives. So I went. I wore my dark blue shawl, the one Armando gave me on our 25th anniversary, and pulled my hair back into a tight bun, the way I used to when I was young and busy. The event was held at a community center downtown. There were women in elegant dresses, others in aprons, some in uniforms. And there I was, a little woman with worn shoes and hands that had scrubbed more than most machines could count. When they called my name, I didn't stand right. Away. I took a breath. Then I walked to the podium slowly, each step anchored by decades of quiet labor. I didn't prepare a speech. I just spoke from where it hurt, and from where it healed. I built something with my hands, I said. And when it was almost taken from me, I didn't shout. I didn't fight dirty. I just reminded people who I was. The room was silent, not out of boredom, but out of understanding. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do, I added, is stay rooted while the storm tries to move her. A few people clapped, then more. and by the time I stepped down, I felt lighter, like I had finally let go of a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. After the ceremony, a young girl came up to me and said, "My mom says you're like a tree. You bend, but you don't break." I laughed softly. "Your mom is smart." She nodded. "She says I should learn from you." I bent down slightly, took the girl's hand, and whispered, "Then tell her to teach you how to stay firm without getting hard. That's the trick." The girl smiled and skipped off, and I stood there, holding her words close like a prayer I didn't know I needed. Back home, I found a letter waiting on my porch. No name on the envelope, just the words, "Gracias por no rendirse." Thank you for not giving up. Inside, a hand-drawn sketch of the laundromat, its name in bold cursive, surrounded by flowers. No signature, just a date, the day I stopped the sale. I framed it and hung it on the wall in my kitchen, right next to the spice rack. It made me smile every time I passed it, not because I needed praise, but because it reminded me that people were watching, even in silence. Time went on. The neighborhood changed again. New cafes, more noise, fewer tamale vendors. But La Fortuna stayed. It aged gracefully, like me, slower maybe, but no less steady. The girls came and went. New workers arrived. Some moved on to open their own businesses. And every time someone asked who started it all, Carla would smile and point to the photo we finally hung above the register. Me, in black and white, arms crossed, chin up, standing in front of the first washing machine. One afternoon, Mateo brought over an old album he'd found while cleaning the apartment. We sat together, flipping through it. Birthdays, baptisms, blurry photos of the laundromat under construction. He stopped at one of Armando, covered in soap suds, holding a broken hose and laughing. "I forgot he used to fix everything with string," Mateo said. I nodded. "That's because he believed anything was worth fixing, as long as you cared enough." I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just felt present, fully, like all the versions of myself, young, tired, betrayed, strong, were finally sitting at the same table. And as Mateo leaned his head on my shoulder for the first time in years, I thought, this was never just about keeping a building. It was about keeping us. Autumn came with its usual softness in Mexico City. Golden afternoons, cooler shadows, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting through the avenues. I started taking longer walks, especially in the early mornings when the city was still stretching its arms. People knew me now, not just as the woman from the laundromat, but as Doña Lola, the one who stayed, the one who said no when it mattered most. One morning, I walked past a mural being painted near the market. Bright colors, swirling ribbons, portraits of local figures. I didn't think much of it, until I noticed the outline of a laundromat at the edge. My laundromat, Lavanderia La Fortuna, and in front of it, a small woman with a scarf over her hair and her hands on her hips. I stood there, stunned, as the artist turned around. "It's not finished yet," he said. "But people wanted her in it. She's part of the story." I blinked away tears and simply said, "She still is." That evening, I sat in the kitchen, looking at old receipts from the early days. Some scribbled on napkins, others stamped and yellowed with time. I remembered the woman I was back then. Poor, determined, with a toddler on one hip and detergent stains on every piece of clothing I owned. I wanted to whisper to that woman, "You did good. You made it count. You didn't vanish." The truth is, I never thought my name would outlive me. I thought it would be forgotten, swept up in the city's noise, buried under new buildings and brighter signs. But here it was, spoken with respect, drawn on walls, carried in the hands of young women who called me Jeffa not out of obligation, but reverence. That's what legacy truly is. Not ownership, not titles, just remembrance wrapped in love. A few weeks later, the neighborhood association sent a proposal to name the alley behind the laundromat after me, Pasaje Dolores Ramos. I didn't know what to say. I never asked for monuments, but the thought of future generations walking past that sign, wondering who I was, made my chest tighten with something like pride. And something deeper, peace. I signed the approval form with a steady hand. That Sunday, Mateo and Isabella joined me for breakfast. She brought fresh tortillas. He brought guava marmalade. The children sat on the floor, coloring. The house was filled with soft noise, spoons on plates, juice being poured, someone laughing at nothing in particular. At one point, Mateo said, "I told the kids the story of the laundromat last night. The real story." I looked up. "And what did they say?" He smiled. They said they want to work there when they grow up. Later that day, as they left, Isabella hugged me. It wasn't a forced hug, not a gesture of guilt. It was quiet, full, real. "Thank you," she whispered. I just held her and said, "Keep walking forward, mija, but don't forget to look back sometimes." She nodded, and I knew, in that moment, that whatever pain had existed between us had softened, not erased, but transformed into something livable. That evening, I took out the framed photo of Armando and me again. I set it beside the window where the last light of the day hit it just right. "You'd laugh at all this, wouldn't you?" I whispered. "Me on murals, streets with my name." But I didn't do it for that. I did it to hold our story in place. And as I stood there, the wind lifting the curtains slightly, I smiled. Not the smile of someone victorious, but of someone complete. In the weeks that followed, I began teaching one of the newer girls at the laundromat how to manage the books. Her name was Mireya, barely 19 but sharp as a blade. She reminded me of myself when I first started. Cautious, observant, always trying to prove something. I didn't rush her. I showed her how to balance the register, how to track supplier receipts, how to handle the customers who always tried to sneak in that one extra load. One afternoon, as we counted coins in the back room, Mireya looked at me and asked, "Do you think it's possible to build something that lasts anymore?" I paused, the question heavier than she knew. "Only if you're willing to lose part of yourself to it," I said. "And only if you remember that what you build will outlive your hands, but not your heart." She didn't speak again after that, but I saw something shift in her, a fire lighting quietly behind her eyes. That night, I found myself rereading the letter I'd written to my future self months ago, the one I tucked beneath the deed. I opened it slowly, half expecting the words to feel foreign, but they didn't. They felt like a mirror, like proof that I had been through a storm and made it through without letting it turn me into someone I wasn't. I read the last line aloud, softly. "You are still here. You are still the center of this story." The next morning, I went to the mural downtown. It was finished now, bright, proud, alive. Children stood in front of it taking pictures. A tour guide pointed at it and said my name aloud, as if it belonged to something bigger than just one person. And maybe it did. Maybe I had become something else. Not a hero, not a legend, but a reminder. That dignity is not something you are given. It's something you refuse to let go of. I walked back slowly, stopping at every shop I passed. I greeted the butcher, the shoemaker, the old woman who sold quesadillas with huitlacoche on the corner. Everyone had a story. Everyone carried something silent and heavy, but they all nodded at me with the same look, not of pity, not of fame, but of respect, the kind that can't be bought, only lived. When I returned home, there was a small package on my doorstep. No note, just a tiny plaque with the words, "Founded by Dolores Ramos, defended by her voice." It was carved in bronze, simple, elegant. I knew instantly where it would go, right above the door of the laundromat, where the sun could strike it every morning, where no one could pass through those gates without reading what mattered most. I installed it myself the next morning, with Mateo holding the ladder steady. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. When I stepped back, I saw him wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. "Looks like it's always belonged there," he said. I nodded. It has. It was just waiting for the right day. That plaque wasn't just metal. It was memory, truth, and warning, all in one. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of worry, but out of fullness. The kind of fullness that hums in your bones when everything is finally in its place. I sat on the porch, wrapped in my shawl, sipping tea and listening to the night breathe. And I thought, if this is what aging feels like, being seen, being steady, being whole, then let the years keep coming. I am not afraid of time anymore. A few days later, Mireya brought her mother to the laundromat. She introduced her with pride, saying, "This is the woman who taught me everything about strength." Her mother looked confused at first, until she realized Mireya wasn't talking about herself, she was talking about me. We shared coffee in the back while Mireya worked the register. Her mother held my hand for a long time and said, "I was afraid my daughter wouldn't find a place where women mattered. Thank you for proving me wrong." Moments like that come quietly, but they stay forever. Not loud, not shiny, just true. And in that truth, I began to understand something I had never put into words before. That survival is not just about holding on. Sometimes it's about handing off, but only when the right hands appear. and Mireya's hands, like Carla's before her, were already shaping the future I once thought lost. The laundromat no longer needed me to function, but it still needed my presence. Not daily, not controlling, but as an anchor. I would show up some mornings with pastries, other days just to water the plants in the window. I didn't interfere. I didn't give orders. I simply existed among the people who now carried the torch I once held alone. And in doing so, I found something rarer than legacy: continuity. One morning, a boy around 10 years old came in with a bag of laundry bigger than he was. Carla helped him hoist it onto the counter. "My mom says this place is magic," he told her. "She says it was built by a woman who never gave up." I stood by the doorway, silent, heartful. That boy didn't know me, but he knew the story. And that was enough. I didn't need the spotlight, just the echo. That evening, I sat with Mateo on the rooftop of the building, the city lights flickering like fireflies across the horizon. He looked at me and asked, "Are you proud of how things turned out?" I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, "I'm not proud because it was perfect. I'm proud because I stayed, even when it wasn't." He nodded. "And you taught us how to stay too." That meant more than anything. The next morning, I wrote one last letter. Not to anyone in particular, just a letter to be found someday. I wrote about the smell of hot towels, the click of coins dropping into machines, the laughter of women swapping stories while folding shirts. I wrote about betrayal, about repair, about how love, when protected fiercely enough, becomes a structure stronger than stone. I ended the letter with a line I had never said out loud before. This laundromat was never just a business. It was a vow to never disappear quietly. I folded the paper and placed it behind the framed photo of Armando and me. Not hidden, just waiting for someone curious enough to look closely one day and realize that every spin of those machines carries the rhythm of a woman who refused to be erased. And that night, as the breeze slipped through the open windows and the scent of fresh linen drifted in from the shop, I whispered to no one in particular, or maybe to all of you reading this, don't let anyone decide when your story ends. Sometimes the final word is yours to write, and sometimes you write it without saying a thing. You just live it. Loud and soft, firm and full, like a quiet revolution made of soap, memory, and steel. Weeks later, on the day the plaque for Pasaje Dolores Ramos was unveiled, the entire street came alive. There were balloons tied to the gates, kids drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, and neighbors holding plastic cups of horchata under colorful papel picado. The mayor gave a short speech, but what mattered most was the silence that followed. The collective breath when the cloth was pulled back and my name stood, etched in stone. I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes and let the moment settle into my bones. Mateo stood next to me, one hand on my shoulder. Isabella held the youngest grandchild, who clapped as if he understood the meaning of it all. Mireya was there too, with her apron still dusted in lint. Carla held her daughter in one arm and waved with the other. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reckoning. A reminder that what began as one woman and one machine had become something no one could deny permanence. After the event, I stayed behind while the others walked back to the laundromat. The street was quieter now. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the sign, feeling the weight of every year that brought me here. It wasn't pride that filled me. It was gratitude. For the mistakes, the almost loss, the bitter lesson of being underestimated. All of it had led to this. Not glory, but truth made visible. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls of La Fortuna in soft gold, I sat inside by the machines. I watched the cycles spin, the slow, determined rhythm of water, heat, time. That's how lives are cleaned too, through movement, warmth, and endurance. I placed one hand on the lid of the oldest washer and whispered, "We're still here, you and me." Later, I handed over the last set of shop keys to Mireya, not as a gesture of retirement, but of trust. "You'll know what to do," I told her, "when it's time." She didn't argue, she didn't panic. She just nodded and said, "I'll guard it like you did." I smiled. "No, mija, guard it better. Guard it as yourself, because that's what mattered. Not preserving the past, but shaping the future with the same unshakable spine." That night, I walked home alone. No fanfare, no speeches, just the cool night air and the sound of distant music from someone's open window. As I turned the corner onto my street, I passed under the new sign. I tilted my head up to read it again. Pasaje Dolores Ramos. I traced the letters with my eyes, and whispered, "That'll do." And for the first time in my life, I felt the fullness of having said everything I needed to say, even without raising my voice. Back in my house, I sat by the window, feet tucked beneath me, the warm glow of the kitchen behind me. The world kept moving, as it always does. But I was no longer chasing it. I had marked it, in silence, in presence, in fierce softness. I had given all I had, and still something in me remained untouched. The part that knows who I am, that never needed permission to exist. And now, if someone ever asks about me, about the old woman who ran the laundromat on the corner of Roma, I hope they say this: she didn't just clean clothes, she cleaned silence. She spun stories. She never left quietly. And I hope they remember that I was never too old to understand. I was only ever too wise to be ignored. Sometimes, the things we build with our hands are the very things that protect what lives in our hearts. Lola's story isn't just about a laundromat. It's about dignity, about knowing your worth even when the world tries to look past you. Maybe you've lived something like that too. Maybe you've had to hold your ground in silence, just to remind others you're still here. If you've ever felt invisible or had to fight for your place without making a scene, tell me in the comments. There's strength in sharing. Sometimes, just putting it into words helps more than you think. And if someone came to mind while you listen to this, someone who's faced something similar, feel free to share this video with them. A quiet story can echo loudly in the right heart. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, real lives, told with honesty and care, stay with us. Sometimes all it takes is the right story at the right time to remember who we are.